revelation.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's live stream. It is March 31st, Tuesday. Thanks for joining me today. Funny things going on here. My clock is all screwed up, so I'm a little late. It's okay, and I guess we are streaming. So, top stories today. Trump is willing to walk away after achieving military objectives. And he tells the United Kingdom, well, get your own oil. We're not going to risk U.S. ground troops to secure the Strait of Hormuz. Who knows what's going to happen there? He might be bluffing. I think he's leaving the world guessing about what he's going to do next. Escalate or walk away. He's also sending different signals about what he's going to do as far as boots on the ground, take over Karg Island, parachute into the strait, into the heights over the Strait of Hormuz, possibly. Also, stories breaking today. Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer says the 2020 census was wrongly counted and it costed the Republican Party 4 or 5 seats. Also, just as a note, globalism is mortally wounded, but it marches on, and we could see that happening in country after country, particularly in the United States, with the communist funding, the establishment funding of the No Kings protest. So, why don't we, there's not a lot to go through today. There's about 20 headlines to go through today. It's sort of a slow news day. I don't know why. The Defense Department had a briefing this morning. Didn't really tell us more information, but it was a briefing that was worth looking at. Looked at that as well. So before we go any further, let's just start reading the news. We're going to start with the Associated Press. Gulf allies privately make the case to Trump to keep fighting until Iran is decisively defeated. Gulf allies of the United States, led by Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, are urging President Donald Trump to continue prosecuting the war against Iran, arguing that Tehran has been weakened enough by the months-long U.S.-led bombing campaign after private grumbling at the start of the war that these Gulf states were not given adequate advance notice of the U.S.-Israeli attack, and complaining the U.S. had ignored their warnings that the war would have devastating consequences for the entire region. Some of the regional allies are making the case to the White House that the moment offers historic opportunity to cripple Tehran's clerical rule once and for all. And I think that's sort of happening. The point is, bombing campaigns don't change situations on the ground necessarily, especially when it comes to things like regimes, whether they stay in power or not. Now, the Islamic Republic of Iran foresaw the tactics that would be employed to attack the regime, try to dislodge the regime. And so they employed all the counter tactics to avoid this being effective, and which is happening. But for how long? Donald Trump, this is the Financial Times. Donald Trump says U.S. could take the oil in Iran. U.S. president tells the Financial Times he's considering seizing the strategic Karg Island even as negotiations continue. So this is one plan, which leads me to play this short clip back from Trump back, I think it was in 1987. So this is after the hostage crisis had taken place in Iran, and Ronald Reagan was still president. So let's listen to Trump from 1987.
I'm running for the presidency. I'm here because I'm personally tired of seeing this great country of ours being ripped off.
But as far as Trump is concerned, our allies are only part of the problem. The real culprit is Iran.
Why couldn't we go in and take over some of their oil, which is along the sea?
How would you do that? Would you send in the Marines? Would you take a chance in a war?
Let them have Iran. You take their oil. That's what
How?
How?
I mean, do we want a war? What do you mean we
in,
take their oil?
You go in. You're
How
gonna have
do
a
we
war,
go
Barbara.
in?
You're going to have a war by being weak.
Okay, how do we go in? What do we do?
Excuse me.
Yeah?
You're going to have a war, and it's going to start in the Middle East.
What if the Soviet Union said, you do this to Iran, we're going to come in?
I don't believe they'd do it. The next time Iran attacks this country, go in and grab one of their big oil installations, and I mean grab it and keep it, and get back your losses, because this country has lost plenty because of Iran. Because I'm running for the presidency. I'm here because I'm...
So there you heard from Donald Trump from 1987 with Barbara Walters talking about his idea about effectively seizing Carg Island. Now, whether that's possible, whether that would be effective, whether after invading the island, what exactly would happen. I mean, there's oil there on the island, but there are pipelines that certainly could be shut. The pipelines just don't go into the ground and have oil coming out. The pipelines go to oil fields where the oil is extracted, and then it's pumped to Carg Island. So Carg Island is basically just a spigot, but they could cut off oil production. Now, it would take a lot to secure that island, and then you would be receiving fire from above in Iran proper. Moving back to the headlines. And this Financial Times story. The U.S. president told the Financial Times in an interview on Sunday that his preference would be to take the oil, just like he just said in 1987, comparing the potential move to Venezuela, where the U.S. intends to control the oil industry indefinitely following its capture of strongman Nicolas Maduro. Now, there are a couple things. Okay, first of all, when Trump became president in 2016, he also took control of oil fields in Syria because he blamed the last administration. Well, if we're there, at least we should take the oil, which he then did, and we've held those oil fields ever since. He talked a lot about Iraq, and he said, how come in Iraq we spent all that treasure? How come we didn't take their oil? He would have. Then, of course, what happened in Venezuela, just talked about from the story from the Financial Times. And then we just looked at that clip from him and Barbara Walters in 1987, where he said basically the same thing. Now, what he's telling the British, the Telegraph here says, go get your own oil, Trump tells Britain. Britain needs to learn how to fight. And U.S. Defense Secretary refuses to commit to NATO because NATO is not helping in any way. Matter of fact, some NATO countries are actually hindering the war effort in the United States. Why, I don't know. Iran has kind of been a thorn in the side of European countries for some time. And the European countries have played appeasement with Iran, and that obviously hasn't worked. So Trump tells Britain to get their own oil, and he's threatening to walk away after military objectives have been met, but perhaps the Hormuz Strait is not open. Now, Iran is currently, I didn't put the article in here, but there was a story today on Iran charging a toll for the Strait of Hormuz. Now, we don't know exactly what that is. I wish I had that story. Maybe I could get it on my phone. That Iran was planning on charging, I think it was in Drudge. Iran sets toll for Strait of Hormuz. Oh, I didn't put it in because it's the Daily Star, and I don't trust this kind of tabloid. They don't really practice journalism. They hear something and then they publish it. It says Iran Security Commission has approved a plan to impose tolls on the Strait of Hormuz and stop America and Israel from moving through. That's not going to happen. It's an international waterway. They don't have the right to do that because they don't incur anything. It's not like traversing the Panama or even Suez Canal, because that had to be built. The locks have to be maintained. The canal has to be run. So it's different than just, it's a natural waterway allowing, basically it's extortion. A toll is extortion. And so Trump might walk away and just, bomb the crap out of Iran and then just sail away and let the people who get the oil from the Persian Gulf to deal with it. We'll see. I doubt he's going to do that. But Trump always leaves people guessing. So, and as a caveat, as I always said, since the beginning of this, I don't support the choice to go to war. I don't support war generally. I think this is a terrible decision. There are too many things that could go wrong. We talk constantly about the escalation ladder and how this has been war game time and time again. And there are too many things that could go sideways, obviously. So, but it's on now. And so for me, as a citizen of the United States, I just want it to be ended in a fashion that is swift and effective. Certainly that we don't have to go back, but we might very well have to go back to Iran. But I don't think there's a going back. And I've explained why over time. I don't want to go too much more into it, but Iran was ready to receive long-range anti-ship missiles, which would have made an operation like this inert or impossible without, taking on losses, ship losses, etc. All right, Zero Hedge, global energy crisis or Iranian surrender in 5 weeks. The last time global energy markets witnessed a similar shock was during the 1973 oil embargo, which I witnessed. Things have changed quite dramatically since the 1970s. The U.S. is far less dependent on the energy resources from the Middle East, though any shocks to the global oil trade have the ability to ripple out and affect American markets. Furthermore, Arab oil producers are now largely allied with the U.S., which means there's less risk of a prolonged shutdown due to the conflict. In this case of the Strait of Hormuz, any direct damage to America is minimal. Only 77%, of all oil shipped to the U.S. actually travels through the Hormuz, and Venezuelan oil is helping to fill the gap. The greater danger is rooted in globalism and the interdependent trade system. Certainly, indeed, and like I said before, is Iran is extorting tolls from passing ships. I don't think this is going to be allowed to continue. Who knows? But moving on with the story, for example, U.S. allies like Australia, India, Japan, and the Philippines are heavily exposed to the Hormuz shutdown. Australia is currently 1 month away from supply shortages, and the country has little to no backup. The Philippines has already declared a state of emergency and established ration policies. They have perhaps 2 months of emergency supplies. Japan is currently tapping into strategic oil reserves and are boosting coal-fired power. China is facing significant exposure, with 15% of their oil supplies coming directly from Iranian wells and around 35% of their total oil supply traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. China has around 4 months of reserves before crisis hits them like a freight train. And there was another story that's saying their renewables, their alternative sources, their solar and stuff is helping fill the gap. It isn't, because of what is seen as the real over-industrialization of China and its reliance on coal and oil. Iran claims that they intend to let non-hostile ships pass the strait, but they've stopped multiple Chinese ships this week after this announcement was made. It is likely that war conditions will continue for at least another month, and in the worst-case scenario, the Hormuz could remain closed well beyond the cutoff date for many at-risk countries. The longer the war goes on, the greater the chance of the market cascade. And prognosticators out there adding their own propaganda spin to these events, including the notion that the West is on the verge of collapse because of the Hormuz closure. In reality, the East is far more economically exposed than the West is to this war. That said, there are risks to the U.S., and they are reliant on how long the conflict lingers. I say 2 more weeks. I don't think this is going to go till May. We had confirmation, finally, of B-52 strikes, and I imagine, I don't know for sure, and I imagine, I don't have any evidence of this, that the B-52 strikes are centering around Hormuz. And the fortifications around Hormuz, the caves where these anti-ship missiles are stored, and they pop out with mobile launchers and they fire and then they retreat. We don't have a lot of evidence of Russia, of a lot of Russia targeting information. So you have to have satellites to target. Or you need someone physically on site with a laser pointed it at that. So if you don't have satellites, it's very hard to target appropriately. We know there was some help, and it was indicated. Now, whether this is propaganda to inflame tensions with Russia or not, it's hard to say. But there is evidence, and coming from Zelensky, so it's suspect. But the precise nature of the attack, specifically the timing, also when expensive hardware was on the tarmac in Saudi Arabia, Prince Sultan Air Base, that's indicative of Russia helping with some targeting. I also think the CIA base that was targeted early in the conflict was assisted by Russia. I don't think the Iranians need help with targeting infrastructure. It's more around non-static targets that are either there or not there. Like, an oil processing plant is there. It's not going anywhere. But certain military objectives, planes on the tarmac, etc., are considered dynamic targets because they move around. Energy crisis, election dangers, and global economic warfare. As I noted, October of 2024, in the article, the Atlantic Council has big plans for a war between the U.S. and Iran. There has been a concerted effort among globalists to lure Americans and Europeans into long-term conflicts with Iran and Russia. The establishment media reports that Iran hacked the Trump's campaign's election strategies and gave them to the Harris camp. There are also rumors spread by U.S. intelligence agencies that Iran was working to have Trump assassinated. Are these claims true? There's little public evidence available to prove it. And what the author is saying here is that, as I stated earlier, was the cause, the catalyst to launch this operation, was it because sophisticated long-range Chinese anti-ship missiles were being shipped to Iran, or was that fake? Because that, out of all the scouring, that was the only reason I could find why Trump would make this decision right now. Endanger the midterms for what? Was that propaganda put into the press by the Israelis or the deep state, the global deep state, globalists, what have you? Who knows? Zero Hedge again, U.S. gas prices hit politically sensitive $4 a barrel, $4 a gallon level as Trump eyes Iran war off-ramp. And I have a little graph here. It kind of shows around the country where prices are the most expensive. It's in the West. Also because a lot of those are Democrat states and they have severe gas tax. Now, if you didn't know anything about state gas taxes, the most liberal states like California have up to $2 a gallon tax. Almost half of what you pay is paid in state tax. The cheapest are the Midwest states. And there's some Eastern Seaboard states that are fairly expensive. And then other Southern Midwest states as well. But the West, Nevada, California, Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington and Illinois, go figure, have the most states. Highest. Hawaii have the most cost per gallon. Moving on to the Daily Beast, they say Trump secretly admits humiliating defeat on major war aim. Donald Trump is prepared, and I usually don't quote or reference the Daily Beast because they're not really a news organization. I mean, they've broken some stories, but they're highly biased. Donald Trump is prepared to walk away from the war in Iran, even if the Strait of Hormuz does not reopen. According to a report, the 79-year-old president has been telling aides he is willing to end military operations in the Middle East without resolving the crisis surrounding the vital shipping route, which is 1/5 of the world's oil passes. Any decision to leave the strait closed and not bother to resolve the resulting oil crisis would mark a humiliating walkback for Trump, who has been making increasingly unhinged threats to escalate the conflict unless Tehran caves and reopens the narrow passage from the Persian Gulf. Here's the issue, as far as this is concerned, that first of all, the choice of words used by the Daily Beast isn't correct. Trump is not going to be humiliated. He eliminated the threat. There are other objectives to this. Obviously, opening the Strait of Hormuz is one. But it's the Iranian enrichment, the missile program, et cetera, et cetera. So it's multi-objective. And some of these are being met, some of them are not being met, but this was war gamed. In no scenario did anyone say that Iran was not going to close the Strait of Hormuz. If you want more unsettling news, Zero Hedge says China's quiet gains during U.S.-Israel war on Iran. China seems to be gaining palpable economic and strategic benefits from the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. That could be debated. Challenges the petrodollar and yuan's rise against the dollar. I talked this against the U.S. dollar, and I talked about this to a certain degree previously about some of the real threats, and that's to the petrodollar, which are severe or certainly concerning. And the point being is that Trump's chess move here is to return to an assured U.S. dominance. Will his gamble pay off? Russia is preoccupied in Ukraine. China gets a lot of their oil from the Persian Gulf. So us being there with a whole armada of ships and fleets at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, we could embargo. But will this pay off? Will it succeed? Will we come out relatively unscathed with achieving objectives that will return U.S. to dominance really freedom and liberty, hopefully, to dominance and to put the heathen communist Chinese back on their heels that everybody loves so much. Everybody loves the Chinese. They're wonderful people. Oops. The outcome of these events is diminution of the U.S. dollar's hegemony and the rise of the Chinese yuan. China continues to purchase discounted oil from Iran and yuan, and the procurement of Russian oil will also be in non-USD denominations. The fall of the U.S. dollar will accentuate China's rise as a major competitor of the U.S. China is already vying for common BRICS currency, and its efforts will intensify in the future. The U.S. dollar continues to weaken. The war in the Middle East presents an opportunity for the Chinese yuan to accentuate China's geoeconomic rise. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about this cheerleading, but this operation in Iran strikes at the heart of BRICS. Now, BRICS is supposed to be an economic alliance, but it's proving to be more and more of a military alliance, which once we saw that, it starts to worry NATO, well, worries the United States specifically. Observing and analyzing American military activities, China's observation of Operation Epic Fury provides its military with an opportunity to gather ample data on American military tactics and strategies. It also provides China with insight into the capabilities and limitations of American weapon systems, the downing of American fighter jets, including F-15E Strike Eagles, KC-135 Stratotanker, F-35A and Q-9 Reapers, as well as the destruction of radars and limitations of American air defense systems in the Middle East is an opportunity for the Chinese military to evaluate its military arsenal and reassess its own capabilities and limitations vis-a-vis American military prowess. The Chinese-made anti-aircraft systems didn't function. Weren't able to detect the stealth aircraft, weren't able to react to cruise missiles, and I think China's a paper tiger. I'm not saying that they're not significant military foe, but the problem is the West has always intensified the risk or the might of military adversaries. They did this with the Soviet Union. They constantly overestimated the amount of tanks they have, the amount of missiles they had, the amount of troops they had, the amount of proper strategized operational capability they have. I mean, it happens all the time. I just think that we have the most advanced and ready and capable fighting force probably the world has ever seen. So did we give anything away yet? The only new technology that was used in Venezuela and is possibly going to be used in Iran prior to some military boots on the ground invasion or occupation, I should say, would be the discombobulation, psychic weapons, or audio, whatever you frequency weapons. But Trump is also, and he told the North Koreans this, Trump is also in the possess of intense particle beam weaponry. So lasers and plasma beams and other directed energy weapons that not only could discombobulate troops, but also can destroy targets. With the help of artificial intelligence and machine learning, the Chinese military would analyze these weapon systems and military strategies and create real-life war-like simulations for the Chinese military with precise data. The destruction and limitation of the American military assets would also persuade the global vendors to pursue Chinese combat-tested alternatives for the May 2025 Pakistan-India war, thus augmenting Chinese defense supports. And then, of course, they talk about strengthening rare earth leverage against American military-industrial complex, which has been a problem all along. I don't know why we were getting rare earth minerals from our military foe. Ridiculous. Really stupid. Story number 8 from Reuters. U.S. counterterror officials plan Antifa summit. Summit targeting Antifa left-wing groups planned for summer. Some current and former U.S. officials say event would be a distraction from threats posed by Iran, Hezbollah. The Trump administration is organizing an international summit focused on countering the left-wing movement Antifa, which is worldwide, and other groups. 3 sources familiar with the matter said, an effort that highlights the shift in U.S. government's counterterrorism priorities over the past year. Just like the war in Iran, in this chess move, what you could see Trump doing behind the scenes is countering the inroads socialist, communist front groups, specifically front groups for the communist Chinese, of taking root in Democrat societies and advocating for revolution. So, and paired with this, you have actual terrorism and insurrection going on in the United States. So part of these left-wing groups, let's say Antifa, right? They physically attacked a federal facility, an ICE facility, with guns. Okay? That's fringe fanatic groups attacking federal agents. You don't have to say any more than that. There's plenty to worry about, including Hezbollah, but also the red-green nexus people don't talk about. To me, they're one and the same. If you're against freedom, I'm against you. You want to practice your religion, and you're an adult, and you want to be transgender, nobody has problems with that. There's no surrendering of rights for those people. But if you're attacking legitimate federal operations, law enforcement, etc., you become a risk to the stability of the nation, period. But there's more. There's also Islamic terrorism, and we saw some of that popping up after the start of this military operation. And even in Germany, Zero Hedge reporting Chancellor Merz admits a considerable proportion of violence in Germany comes from immigrant groups. Now, I'm not going to go on and talk about immigrants. I'm not trying to conflate illegal immigrants and immigrants. Immigrants aren't always a risk. But the problem is with Europe is you had war going on in the Middle East, and young military-age men or ma'ams coming into Europe from Muslim countries, refusing to assimilate into Western culture, creating enclaves, and then from those enclaves going out and committing heinous crimes against not just against the native population, but against the population in general. And plus, they don't work. And so they're on the public dole. There's a drain on the society because it's a two-pronged thing. They're draining the society by being on social service and also committing crime, which costs taxpayer dollars to fight crime, etc. So it's not, it's not about race as much as it is about whether the people that come into your country will abide by the way we do things here, living lawfully, et cetera, or in Germany for them. Post-millennial Trump says birthright citizenship was meant for the babies of slaves, not rich people from China. Birthright citizenship. This is, I believe, a quote from, looks like a quote from True Social. Birthright citizenship is not about rich people from China and the rest of the world who want their children and hundreds of thousands more for pay to ridiculously become citizens of the United States of America. It is about the babies of slaves. We are the only country in the world that dignifies the subject with even a discussion. Look at the dates of this long ago legislation, the exact end of the Civil War. The world is getting rich, selling citizenships to our country while at the same time laughing at how stupid our U.S. court system has become. Dumb judges and justices will not a great country make. Why? Washington Examiner says because Democrats oppose ICE itself, not abuses or overreach. And that was a story by Guy Benson. But the funny thing is happening lately is that all news sites are becoming exclusively subscription. So a lot of the free sites that you used to be able to get free news at, including AP and Reuters, now they have put up a paywall. So it's harder. And Washington Examiner is one. But anyway, Guy Benson of Fox fame wrote this article, Democrats oppose ICE itself, not abuses and overreach. That's true because I said previously, they don't like the legislation that bars undocumented migrants from coming and living in the country. And the process which follows, which means detention and deportation without a hearing, without a warrant, etc. They don't like that. And so they oppose ICE itself because ICE is fulfilling that mission by enforcing those laws because they can't get enough support to change the legislation. Why? Because American citizens don't want non-citizens coming over the border unvetted to the tune of possibly as much as 30 million, right? I like this article, The Hill. Story number 12, MAGA's latest campaign of cruelty targets immigrant kids' education. Yeah, sure it does. The regime's brutal war on undocumented immigrants, school children, the regime. Heritage is angling to get the Supreme Court to overturn Plyler versus Doe, 44-year-old ruling that states cannot deny a free public education to children based on immigration status. Plyler overturned a 1975 Texas law denying state funds for undocumented students and punishing school districts that enrolled them. It's called deterrence. And I saw it firsthand with the influx of English as a second language students taking over schools. So they're obviously recent immigrants, but the burden upon the taxpayer was great because it literally doubled class sizes. And so the distraction for kids that can't learn English or aren't up to grade level in their learning distracted teachers from teaching other students who were advanced. So it's not just about the brutal war on undocumented immigrants and the cruelty. It's not about cruelty. It's especially low income people that come to this country illegally and get free stuff. And some of that free stuff is a free education for children. But the whole overarching phrase is they shouldn't be here in the first place. So, and I'm not against immigrants at all. I don't care what race or what country they are from or whatever. But people have to be vetted. And when my parents came here, they needed a sponsor. So if you couldn't be economically responsible for yourself and your family, Someone else would have to be, but not the state. And that's the problem with the flood of illegal immigrant children into certain school districts, is they're forced with an influx that they couldn't handle economically. You could go ahead and do your research in New York City and find that out to be true. Just the news, Trump administration saying it's lifting holds on reviewing asylum applications from non-high-risk countries. So wait a second here. I thought Trump's regime, its brutal regime, was at war with undocumented immigrants. Perhaps, because that's what the electorate wanted. But we're not against immigrants on a whole. And you could see that with this article. Trump administration says it's lifting holds on reviewing asylum applications from non-high-risk countries. So not where terrorists come from. The story goes on to say the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services said Monday it has resumed reviewing asylum applications from migrants who have been vetted through Operation Paris and migrants who are from countries that are not considered high risk. The lift does not impact asylum seekers from 39 countries. The Trump administration determined lacked adequate screening measures and under Trump's travel ban, who make up the bulk of the 1.5 million applicants. So he's willing to say, no, we're gonna lift asylum, a hold on asylum, but the majority of people seeking asylum are from countries that we won't grant asylum from, or that we shouldn't, because of so-called persecution. There are plenty of non-free societies that persecute their people all the time. But there has to be a legitimate risk to your life. So if you, let's say you're part of an opposition party and the regime from the country you live in is hunting down opposition, then maybe you might, be granted asylum. If you're in Venezuela and you're Maria Machado, let's say, you could grant someone like that asylum. But not somebody saying, well, I want asylum because I don't like my country. That, that doesn't work. Just the news, 3 illegal Guatemala migrants sentenced to 25 years in prison for kidnap, killing of New York man. But these are our neighbors. 40-year-old Gustavo Hernandez, 21-year-old Walter Ramirez Geronimo, and 19-year-old Wilson Ramirez Geronimo pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter for the abduction and death of Juan Carlos Diaz Geronimo. But this guy was not related to the defendants. These defendants stalked, kidnapped, brutalized, and discarded a human being as if his life meant nothing. This is why we don't want illegal immigrations, because they're not illegal immigrants aren't necessarily vetted enough to prevent this sort of thing from happening. And obviously these people should be deported. But getting back to the crime, a video surveillance showed the defendants exiting their vehicle, attacking the victim, and attempting to drag him towards the Isuzu. The victim briefly escaped and ran to a nearby gas station, but was followed and beaten before being placed in the trunk of the vehicle, and then he was later killed. I just have to fix this one story. It's out of place. What happened to this article? Hold on. It looks like I deleted that headline. Weird. Well, the headline was that the Pentagon the Secretary of War, for the first time ever, removed 4 names from a promotion list. And the story goes on to say, Pete Hegseth's recent decision to pull 4 names from the military promotions list diverges from standard practice. Hegseth made the unusual decision earlier this month, which prompted backlash from Democrats because 2 of the Army officers were allegedly black and 2 were women. Pentagon denied that race or gender played any role in the removals. Under Secretary Hegseth, military promotions are given to those who have earned them. Meritocracy, which reigns in this department, is apolitical and unbiased. So, this may very well not be a racist or sexist move. It may very well be that the prior administration forwarded names for promotion specifically because these people were female and or of color, and that their merit didn't warrant promotion. That's what I guess what's happening here. All right, moving on. Washington Examiner, Hillary Clinton 2028, it's not as crazy as you think. So she was going to give the keynote address at the McIntyre-Shaheen dinner in Nashua in New Hampshire, which is known for its primary importance. Could it just be a harmless speech? Sure, but the McIntyre-Shaheen dinner keynote slot is usually reserved for Democrats plotting a White House run. In fact, it was founded in 1959 by supporters of John F. Kennedy with the explicit purpose of boosting his campaign. And in every presidential cycle since, the eventual Democratic president and vice president stood at that podium. And nearly every keynote speaker who was already in the White House was angling to get there. So last week on episode 139 of Tuesdays with Perry, I discussed with Perry. He said, no, it's not a chance. I discussed because Hillary Clinton is all of a sudden in the media cycle again. And her political ambitions have no bounds. And so it doesn't surprise me in the least that she might want to run for 2028. She might get a different reception this time, or she might not. I think she's the go-to. Because if you've seen the polling for people who are angling towards a 2028 run, they suck. Even though I think like someone like Andy Beshear would be perfect, even his numbers suck. Nobody has really been polling Hillary Clinton, so who knows? I couldn't imagine. What a beast. What a beast. But if there's going to be a retribution campaign, Hillary Clinton would be the perfect person to lead that. Because she has a very good way of making everything sound, urbane. Oh, no, it's just we have to hold people to justice, blah, blah, blah. Right. And behind the scenes, just like Barack Obama did, he had all nice things to say about everybody, but behind the scenes, the IRS and other federal agencies were targeting conservatives. Speaking of conservatives, Associated Press, could a Democrat really replace Marjorie Taylor Greene? This retired Army general is trying, and they're talking about Sean Harris. And so he was a good general, and what I've heard from him, I liked. I just don't like Democrats. And the fact is, this is going to be more mud on the face of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's open arguments with the President of the United States resulted in her resigning, and what she was doing in Congress was needed. I liked her because of what she was doing, and for her to just run away and possibly give up her House seat to a Democrat. And that was her bet. Her bet was that, oh, a Republican will replace me. We don't know. I mean, the mainstream media is cheering on this general. But I think what she did politically was ridiculously stupid. To resign in the middle of her term, she just should have said, you know, I'm not going to seek another term. But to remove herself in the middle of this critical time. All right, getting back to one of our other big stories here, just the news. Comer says bias census miscalculated in 2020, costing Republicans multiple House seats. Really? Big surprise here. I knew when the census came out during COVID. Was the most ridiculous thing. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer said Monday his committee has received information showing the United States Census Bureau in 2020 miscalculated the number of Americans in a way that cost Republicans multiple House seats. Comer claimed the basic count was biased against Republicans because the Bureau made estimations instead of doing physical count during COVID. They estimated high in Democratic areas like major cities and underestimated in suburban areas known to be more friendly to Republicans. The basic count was miscounted grossly in the last census. And of course, and it's always done, it's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy to inflate numbers of people of color and urban cosmopolitan types and undercount, underestimate people in rural areas, which, as Comer said, tend to vote Republican. I mean, it's a conspiracy. And people don't know it's a conspiracy. And the funny thing was, if you didn't watch The Five yesterday, it was hysterical because I was waiting, was it yesterday? I was waiting for somebody to bring up against Jessica Tarlov about, she kept talking about the Democratic primaries, the Democratic primaries, the Democratic primaries. And finally, Charlie Hurt piped up and he said, well, the Democrats rig their primaries. So how undemocratic is that? And it's funny too, because my wife and I were talking about that yesterday. That to be democratic and then to undermine one of the bases of democracy, which is the ballot. Oh, and by the way, it's not illegal to do so. In both party charters, the parties themselves reserve the right to pick the candidate. So the primary voting, I mean, the Republicans adhere to the primary votes, but they don't have to do so legally. And the Democrats never do. You could see that happen with Joe Biden, right? That whole thing when he was originally nominated was kind of a coup. And then when he decided to run and then he dropped out and then they didn't have a primary. It's really, I don't know how people within the electorate tolerate something like that. Just the news, woke pseudoscience NIH awards new funding to transgender mice experiments after Doge cutoff. Less than a year after the Department of Government Efficiency abruptly halted funding for transgender experiments on animals intended to improve so-called gender-affirming care for humans. That was the original experiment. The National Institutes of Health chose to fund at least one again. Not under the same headline. Androgen effects on the reproductive neuroendocrine axis of fine-tuned male hormones for women who identify as men using mice that were gonadectomized, injected with testosterone and decapitated, received another $584,000 for fiscal year 2026, following the $646 it received for fiscal year 2025. So it sounds like it was still being funded. I don't know really what they're reporting here. My point is, maybe the research might be needed for the simple reason is that maybe they're testing to see exactly what damage is done by people electing to have these gender rejecting care, taking opposite sex hormones, basically. And so maybe the study needs to be done because maybe it's going to reveal some sort of problem, health problem that that's caused by these treatments. Maybe they can stop them. Not that I'm going to go along with, like I said, if an adult wants to inject himself with whatever, I suppose it's okay. It's the thing with the children that bothers me, and that the studies have shown that, kids getting gender rejecting care suffer from it. Just the news again. Justice Department sues Minnesota over civil rights violations regarding girls' sports. Here we go with transgenderism again. The U.S. Justice Department Civil Rights Division filed a lawsuit Monday against Minnesota, alleging the state's sports policies violate federal civil rights law that protect against sex-based discrimination, and that is Title IX. It's like separate but equal, and I'm not talking about segregation. I'm talking about I'm talking about sports. And so women should be allowed to compete against their own, period. The Justice Department's lawsuit marks a new legal fight in the ongoing national debate over transgender student participation in school sports, challenging Minnesota's policies as a violation of federal protections against sex-based discrimination. And the thing is, you never have women who identify, or girls, I should say, or women, who identify as men. I don't have a problem with them competing against men in sports because they'll do poorly. My problem is men identifying as women competing in women's sports have an unfair advantage, and it shouldn't be allowed. It's called cheating. TMZ has the headline, article number 20, Charlie Kirk murder. Docs claim bullet used doesn't match alleged rifle. So says TMZ. Of course, they're wrong. According to the legal docs obtained by TMZ, Robinson's defense team argues there's a discrepancy between the ballistic evidence and the weapon prosecutors say is connected to Robinson. They haven't even seen the report. Robinson is facing multiple charges, including aggravated murder and felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury, indeed, and Charlie Kirk slain. They say the ATF was unable to identify the bullet recovered at the autopsy to the rifle allegedly tied to Robinson. All right. Here's ballistics. And what I want to say it again to all you crazy people out there with the trap door conspiracies and all this stuff. Charlie, so it was, I guess, a 30-06? Okay, so, and then there's some people saying, 38-06 would never do that limited amount of damage to Charlie. So apparently, what we understand is the bullet entered Charlie's neck, and instead of shattering his spine and continuing, his spine shattered the bullet, which then fragmented down into his body cavity, and several pieces of the bullet shattering or piercing his heart. At least that's what the coroner says. And even the coroner said, it was an act of God because if the bullet passed through Charlie, it could have easily hit other people. So the bullet is mangled, and when you have the bullet mangled to such a degree, it's hard to identify the caliber and the rifling that would match it specifically to that rifle. I have no doubt that this kid was the killer. He went back to recover the rifle, so he knew the rifle was there. What was a rifle doing in a bag in the woods after the shooting? His DNA was all over the screwdriver that was used to assemble the rifle or to get up through the door, unlock the door, or break the door and get onto the roof. There's too much there. Sorry. You could have your conspiracy theories, and please show me the evidence. I'll change my tune. If anybody could debate in a way or show me evidence in a way that is convincing, I have no problem with abandoning my position. What I don't like is people pointing to some obscure article. Read the article. See what it says? I'll read the article, or sometimes I won't. I mean, somebody tried to send me, there are more than two genders, and look, this Scientific American article says so. I just don't believe that. Your expressed gender is a figment of your mind. If you could say there's some biological evidence, right? Maybe hormone levels or who knows, that it's not just a product of your imagination or your mind, sure, show me. People that consider themselves transgender have these hormone imbalances that I think might be chemically induced. Whatever. Show me. I just don't, anybody could think they're the King of England. That doesn't make them the King of England. Even though they really, really, really in their soul believe it to be true. Okay, some cool news. Associated Press, NASA begins the countdown for humanity's first launch to the moon in 53 years. And I like this story because, A, they're not going to land on the moon. Because there were people out there saying, oh, it's a moon landing. We're going to put people on the moon. It's a conspiracy. It's a this. They're going to put space weapons on the moon. They're not going to the moon. They're going to orbit the moon. They're going to orbit the Earth. Then they're going to orbit the moon. Then they're going to come back. But it is sort of a trial run for another manned moon mission, which I think is good because if you're going to go to Mars, you need to base on the moon. People might not have heard that, and there are other reasons you could test things on the moon that you might use on Mars. Some tech news, post-millennial AI error lands Tennessee grandma in jail for 5 months after she's flagged in bank fraud case. A Tennessee woman was erroneously arrested and detained after an AI facial recognition tool used by police flagged her as a suspect in a bank fraud case in North Dakota. She had never even visited North Dakota, but was jailed for 5 months. Travesty. You can't rely on technology. You can't. And solely on, they said, oh, we had other evidence, but they didn't really. Could you prove she was ever in North Dakota? And I guess she doesn't have to be in North Dakota to commit bank fraud. I don't believe in tech surveillance like that. I don't believe in facial recognition. Now, because they use it all over. They use it at department stores and stuff. Let's say in a heightened security situation at the Super Bowl, or you're going into a stadium or something, and they're using facial recognition to look for known terrorists. Okay. You could allow that. It's a private venue, so. But law enforcement using it to what? Confirm evidence, maybe. But as your primary evidence to arrest somebody from another state. So. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the live stream. Remember, you're under attack psychologically and biologically. So stay hip to the trick. I'm here every Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. or so, sometimes 10:15. Usually for about an hour, I go over about 30 or so headlines, give you a broad spectrum of news to make sure that your worldview is correct. And my worldview, of course. So tonight, episode 130, 130 or 140 of Tuesdays with Perry. We go live about 9:15 or so join us then, where we talk about the latest headlines. We'll be talking about the conflict in Iran, obviously, among other things. So join us then. You can check me out on social media as well. Getter Minds, Facebook, True Social, Substack, Insta. Thanks for joining me today. Hopefully I'll see you tonight. If not, I'll see you tomorrow. Respect.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
You can't handle the truth.
Order. The New World Order.